We are looking at PowerPoint 3 today. So this is day 3 of PFT 107. We are on to macronutrients. We'll be looking at our carbs, proteins, and fats. This is one of those PowerPoints that I warned you guys about. This is a pretty lengthy one. 85 slides, going to be really big, but doesn't mean that it doesn't move fast. A lot of this information on carbohydrates and proteins and fats and stuff, like you guys have heard a lot of this. It's just we want to have like a cent. I know, right? We want to have like a cent. Normally our slides are like 40. The one tomorrow, Charlie, is even bigger. The one tomorrow is like 130 or 140 slides. It is massive, but only because like each vitamin gets like 4 slides, because it's like, here's what the vitamin is, and it's like lots of blank space, and it's like, here's where you find it, and then like, here's what the mineral is, lots of blank space. So don't worry. But we have talked a lot about like all these things, but we do want to have one centralized place where we have all of our information for all of our macros in regards to what they are like in the chemistry realm, what they are in the practical breakdown realm, like how do we consume them, what are the recommended amounts. Like we want to kind of have like a centralized page of notes with all the main pieces of information about these. And so that's why we're going to do macros all together today. So if you have any questions about like how many carbohydrates to eat, or like what are good sources and stuff like that, today is a really great day to kind of chat about that. So here's our carbohydrates section here. You can see obviously we've got lots of fruits, but we also have whole grains and we've got vegetables, because all of those things are going to have carbs in them. I think there's like some meat on there. That doesn't count. Maybe a little bit. There's always like the potential for a little bit of carbohydrates in meat products, but not, the longer they're processed, the less that's the case. Because of like, maybe that animal product had like some glycogen left over in it, but for the most part, we don't consider anything else to have carbs in it. So carbohydrates, super important, right? Absolutely vital and critical for like overall health of people. They play a super vital role in the realm of like sports as well, because they are an immediate source of energy. Carbs tend to be a really great way for us to have high intensity energy for like glycolysis and sporting activities. It's definitely, that's one thing. Like you look at like low carb diets, like I've goofed around with low carb diets before, just because like, I've always tried to have like a relatively balanced view and take on like nutrition. So I try to experience a lot of things. And it's interesting because it's like, you actually do, sometimes people will complain about like having energy problems, and on a low carb diet, if you are in a low intensity routine where you're not, doing like a really high intensity program, or like if you're not like doing lots of sprints with like a medium amount of recovery, as long as you're avoiding that glycolysis type of activity, you're not really in a bad spot in terms of like energy production. But if you do want to perform like glycolysis to its fullest, you do want to make sure that you have like plenty of carbohydrates in your diet. And so we want to have like we want to know how to consume those carbohydrates, because like it's not that carbohydrates make you fat, which is what a lot of people tend to kind of think. We know that like in excess of calories, it's easy to pack a lot of calories into carbs. We also know that like if your glycogen stores are full and you don't have anywhere to put those carbohydrates in terms of temporary storage, they're going to get placed into long-term storage, which is they're going to get converted into fat and stored in the body elsewhere. And so I can see like the tracking, like, it's easy to track. It's fairly easy to understand like where these low carb diets come from. But the longer you look at like the science behind it, the more you start to realize that like they aren't as necessary as a lot of people like claim them to be, right? Now that being said, is it possible to be on like a keto diet or a super low carb diet and be healthy? Yeah, absolutely, it's totally possible. You just have to do it the right way, right? Make sure you're getting plenty of veggies and stuff like that. A lot of times like our problems with like keto diets and super low carb diets is that they don't have very much fiber in them, or vegetables, because maybe those vegetables are actually going to kick you out of keto, like And then like things like beans are a really good source of like minerals and stuff like that. So sometimes stuff like that is a little concerning. But um, anyway, long story long, sufficient carbohydrates is very essential for sports recovery, but also like maintaining your carbohydrate stores in your body to make sure that you can perform well in your next sporting event. So what are carbohydrates if we are breaking them down, right? Well, again, they're organic compounds, which means they're going to be built on the element of carbon. And they're carbon atom attached with oxygen and hydrogen. So, that's what we're looking at. Now, whether or not that is like a simple carbohydrate or a complex carbohydrate, it depends on how many chained molecules it is together. So if we look at like a glucose, right? Glucose is a monosaccharide. This is a single sugar molecule, right? And so you can see carbon, hydrogen, and oxygen here, right? And if we were to attach that glucose molecule to a whole bunch of other glucose molecules, eventually we would get a very, very complex molecule. It's going to take a much longer time to break down. Those are our complex carbs, right? So when we talk about the difference between like simple carbs and complex carbs, really what we're talking about is the chemistry of them, right? We're talking about like simple carbohydrates are often known as like your simple sugars, right? So you can look, these are things like your monosaccharides. Those are your mono for one, saccharides for sugar. Those are single sugar molecules, right? Glucose is the perfect example of that. Like a single molecule of glucose is going to be a monosaccharide. But then we also have disaccharides. Disaccharides double the sweetness. So that's a great way to pack lots of like really sweet tasting stuff into like a food. And also like double the sugar molecules, right? And so that's where we get things like sucrose, right? So if we look at like sucrose, right, this is going to be two glucose molecules linked together, right? And so again, same ingredients here, and they're held together with that oxygen bond right there, right? So what is sucrose? Well, that's actually where you've attached a molecule of glucose, right, a single sugar, to a molecule of fructose, which we're going to typically find in fruits, to make this double sugar molecule that is extremely sweet tasting, right? Like this is literally broken down as much as your taste buds can break something down. They, if you remember your salivary amylase, right, it takes complex carbs and splits them into disaccharides. It gets them down to this level. So if something already at this level hits your tongue, your taste buds fire up like crazy, right? And that's why sugar tastes so good to us, right? Because basically the receptors on your tongue are responsible for making stuff palatable in order to keep you alive. When we think about like what taste buds are, right? Like why did we evolve to have like taste buds, right? The whole point of like, your body's like evolution through time is to basically find the best way to keep your body alive, right? Like that's its only concern. So why would it create something as pleasant as taste? Like taste doesn't really, that's like that's pleasure. This doesn't really have anything much to do with survival, right? Well, that's not really true. We know that pleasure and survival, have a lot of link, right? If something tastes really good, you're more likely to seek out that something. So what we kind of did is we developed these taste buds that make super high energy foods taste really good. If you're a cave person and you're trying to like get you're trying to get like motivated to go out and hunting, your taste buds are going to help that as like a motivating factor. This is another reason why I talked about this before. But cats cannot taste glucose. Cats actually can't taste sugars. They don't have receptors on their tongues that taste sugar molecules. That's how we actually know that cats are 100% carnivores. It's one of the ways we know that they're carnivores, right? So cats are strictly meat eaters. Whereas like dogs, they get like a combination of both. Like dogs are omnivores, kind of like us. They can eat sugars, they can eat proteins, whatever. So like a cat is going to be much more attracted to like something that meaty that's going to taste different to them and be very alluring. Whereas us, like we are drawn in by these sugars, right? And the sweeter something tastes, generally the more addicting it is, right? You know, you see people who have trouble with self-control around carbohydrates all the time, right? Those disaccharides, that's sucrose, right? That's where we find, I don't know, let's take a look at, let's look at a Snickers bar. Not that, nutrition facts. You know, if we look at like the nutrition facts here, it's got 36 grams of carbohydrate, 1 gram of fiber because it does have some nuts in it, 30 grams of sugar, right? When you think about like 30 grams of sugar, if we were to look at, let's see here, russet potatoes, right? Could not have spelled that more wrong. Nutrition facts. Is that what I need to do? I was like, come on, Google's got this. There we go. So there's about 37 grams of carbs. Actually, if we go to 100, what about a small potato? Yeah, small potato. Okay, like a small potato that's, you know, about like 2 inches in diameter, right? Is also going to have 30 grams of carbs in it. So like an entire potato is going to have the exact same number of carbohydrates in it as like an individual Snickers bar here, right? But here's the thing, this does not taste very sweet. Ironically, the amount of sugar molecules in both of them are about the same, but this does not taste very sweet and this does, right? Why is that? Well, because one is packed full of sugars and those sugars are already broken down. So when they hit your taste buds, they light up your brain. Now, that also means that like that potato is a little harder to break down. It's got more fiber in it. Yes, it has more nutrients in it, but it doesn't have a ton. It doesn't have quite as much, you know, instantly usable energy, right? So you got 130 calories in here, 280 calories in here. That's mostly coming from like the chocolate, which is going to have some saturated fat in it, but mostly from like the nuts and stuff that are in there, which are really, really fatty. And then actually they have the same amount of protein, just about. Actually, the potato has just slightly less. So, you know, we can see like the reason a food like this is going to be so addictive is because your cave person brain is going to go, holy crap, that's a great source of energy. Where did you find that? Like, that's incredible. Make sure you hang out near the Snickers farm, you know, like, because it's an instantly usable, great source of energy, right? And that's sort of the downfall here, right? That's what's not so awesome about our mono and our disaccharides. Because they are so sweet, a lot of people tend to be very, very, very addicted to them, right? Now, on the other side, right, looking at that potato is going to fall into a category that we call starch, right? And a starch is really just like it's a blanket term. It really means like a lot of different things. Like if we look at like carbohydrate starches, a starch is going to be any of our complex carbohydrates, right? Actually, here's a pretty good picture of like rice, potato, pulses. I guess it's going to fall under beans, you know, and then like bread, all of those are going to fall into the starches category. So starches are what we refer to as our complex carbs. There's lots of different types of starches, right? There are a ton of them. I'm not going to spend too much time on this because honestly, I don't. This is where we start to get into like cooking, and this is totally not my area. Come on, these are actually, it's showing like cornstarches, so that's not quite what I'm looking for. What I mean is things like pectin, amylopectin. I know the ones that are named pectin. Yeah, okay, so here's a couple different like types of you know, carbohydrates, right? So here's like amylose, right? Which is, you can see here, is relatively more simple than amylopectin, right? And so those are just slightly different looking starches. They're both starches because they are complex, right? They're more than 2 sugar molecules linked together. And there's tons of them. I wish I could remember some of the other freaking names. Oh, wait. Not cellulose. Cellulose I'm going to talk about in just a minute. There's amylose. Oh, great. There we go. All right. So you got like maltodextrins too. Maltodextrin is actually a type of powder you can buy. You guys can buy maltodextrin powder. Uh, it is actually commonly added to certain things. It's relatively sweet tasting, but not super sweet tasting. But this is also a food additive to boost carbohydrate levels. A lot of bodybuilders will use this when they struggle getting enough carbohydrates in their diet. They will often throw maltodextrin powder in there. You can see like as a supplement, if I shop for maltodextrin, you'll see this in the form of like starch, corn starches and things like that. It's actually kind of similar. But it's a great way to like, carbo gain. It's a great way to like kind of fill out carbs if you are having trouble like getting it, right? So that's like a slightly complex one. Let's see here. We can see some other ones like raffinose and all these different names for all these different types of complex carbs. So they all look a little bit different than each other, just slightly, right? Like you can see the chemistry here. They're just in slightly different shapes. And that's why certain foods like have slightly different qualities. Like there are different types of starches in like a russet potato versus like a red potato versus like a white potato. And that's why certain ones are really good for roasting and other ones are really good for like making into mashed potatoes, and some of them are really good for making hash browns. They're different properties there. And that is the end of my cooking knowledge. But I do know that they are all complex carbohydrates, some of them slightly more simple than others. But for the most part, all really good sources if you're looking for like a long sustained energy. So starch is, like I said, it's a blanket term for all of these different categories of, maybe it's 11 glucose molecules held together. Maybe it's 15, maybe it's 20. Each of those are going to have slightly different properties, right? So those are your starches. Then we also have glycogen, which is actually an example of a starch. This is the starch that we store inside of our body, right? So storage form of carbohydrates. It is considered a starch simply because like it is a big complex chain of carbohydrates, but it doesn't necessarily like result in looking like a starchy food the way the way like bread or a potato would, right? Instead, this is kind of this wet soupy mixture that lives inside of our liver and lives inside of all of our muscles. And that way, like, if your muscle's in the middle of doing like a big activity and it doesn't have time to raise your blood sugar levels entirely, it's got some carbohydrates nearby that it can just instantly break down and then metabolize for energy. And then we've got fibers, right? Oh, actually, they're the food names. I was like, God dang it, there's all the names, right? So there's our simple carbohydrates: glucose, fructose, galactose. All of those are single sugar molecules. Galactose, by the way, is found in milk. Is anybody on the call right now lactose intolerant? Have anybody who's lactose intolerant in here? Nobody? Okay. So these are your monosaccharides, right? Glucose, fructose, galactose. You put glucose plus fructose together, you get sucrose, right? And if you put glucose and galactose together, I believe you get lactose. I don't think I've got that messed up. But basically, let me actually look at it. Lactose, glucose. Yeah, it is. It is. I remembered. I remember my freaking chemistry. So if you put those two together, if you put if you put glucose and galactose together, you get lactose. That is right there. This sugar is what people who are lactose intolerant are basically not allergic to, but this is what causes them so many problems. So lactose intolerance is caused by a lack of this enzyme right here called lactase. And lactase, basically, it's an enzyme that some people have in their gut that breaks down lactose into glucose and galactose, right? So now you have two individual sugar molecules. You can get them into your blood and start using them to produce energy, right? But if you do not have that enzyme, in order for that to happen, it stays as a disaccharide, it stays as a double sugar molecule, which means it cannot pass into your blood, which means this sugar is now kind of just running through your gut. And eventually it works its way unbroken down into your gut bacteria. And your gut bacteria is like, is that a sugar? Did a sugar make its way all the way down? This is great. And, the bacteria go nuts and they start feeding on it like crazy. And, kind of like this is going to be such a weird thing to say, but like, kind of like we tend to get a little bit gassy from like eating food and processing that food. And, like it creates like different types of gases. Well, these bacteria are like eating this food and like they're expelling gases. And so that starts to fill up inside of like someone's gut, which is what causes a lot of abdominal cramping. It causes that bacteria to be strictly working on that sugar, which means other stuff doesn't get broken down. And that's why we see so much gastrointestinal distress in individuals who have lactose intolerance. By the way, lactose intolerance is more common on this planet. Let's see here. I looked it up. It was like 60%. What percentage of people are lactose intolerant? It's most of the world. Most of the world is lactose intolerant. 65% of the human 65% of the human population lactose intolerant. So that is this is where there is sometimes there's a freaking argument here for like, hey, maybe like drinking so many milk products like really not made for like the human race. Now, that being said, if you have the enzyme and you're able to break it down, then well, I mean, evolution did its job, and like, hey, we mutated, we're weirdos, and we can eat stuff that we're not really supposed to eat. But that's where we look at like those. We also have maltose that's also going to be found in sugars. I'm sorry, in milks. So maltose and lactose both found in milks there. And then sucrose, that's your table sugar, right? That is straight up table sugar. That's sugar found in candy. That's sugar found in chocolates, right? That is the sugar, again, glucose plus fructose. Very, very, very sweet tasting. So if you are trying to market a product successfully, throw a bunch of that crap in there. And people's brains will go crazy for it. We got our slightly complex carbs like maltodextrin, high fructose corn syrup. This is something else that is extremely sweet tasting, but is not exactly a very complex carbohydrate. It's slightly more complex than regular sugar, but because of how freaking sweet it is, our brains light up like crazy. This is what is in soda, like every pop that you've ever had. High fructose corn syrup and then regular corn syrup. It's high fructose because of its high fructose content. So it is extremely, 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 extremely sweet tasting. But that is what we throw into sodas. And that's why when you look at like, let's see, we'll look up Coca-Cola. I'm sure I'll find a picture of this immediately. There we go. This is how much sugar is inside every like regular bottle of Coke there. It's about a shot glass and a half's worth of sugar. That's 65 grams. I like really sweet coffee. Like I like coffee with plenty of milk and sugar because that's how I like my coffee. And every morning I put 2 teaspoons of sugar, which is equivalent to about 8 grams compared to 65 here. And that is because like I said, really, really, really sweet coffee. So here's the thing. There is actually so much sugar in most sodas that they actually put, what is the ingredient? I got to remember the name of it. I'll remember once I see it. Phosphoric acid. So they put phosphoric acid into sodas. That actually helps you not get nauseous when you drink so much sugar all at once. That acid actually makes it a little easier for your body to not get nauseous, because normally your body would be like, no, it's too much. It's too much sugar, and that can be really bad. So Those are your slightly, they fall into the complex category, but make no mistake, they are still relatively simple. Then we have our starches, like I talked about. And then the one we haven't really talked too much about just yet is fiber. So fiber, oh, and then here's all the further broken down versions. Like I said, this is why this PowerPoint's so large. It's got a lot of, it's very repetitive. We'll get to fiber in just a second. So monosaccharides, glucose, right? Great for supplying energy to cells. Galactose, that's a single sugar found in milk. That actually won't bother too many people. Fructose, which is a super sweet tasting sugar found in fruits. That's why fruits taste so sweet. Sucrose, which is glucose and fructose together. Table sugar, that's exactly what we're talking about. Lactose, which is glucose plus galactose. And then maltose, that's 2 glucose molecules there. So that's what we're looking at in terms of our disaccharides. Oligosaccharides, anywhere from 3 to 10, right? So still relatively simple here, and going to make your taste buds go crazy. Maltodextrins, corn syrups, right? All the stuff that we love to throw into into like foods to make them taste way, way, way sweeter. And then your polysaccharides, right? The big starches found in grains, legumes, those are beans, potatoes, and yams, right? And then fiber. Okay, so fiber is such a complex carbohydrate, right? This is where we're looking at something like cellulose, right? So let's look at cellulose. Cellulose is so freaking complex. It is a very, very, very tightly packed, this is a great picture here. Very, very tightly packed carbohydrate that forms like such a really good net of things that we cannot really break it down. It's so complex, our digestive system can just eat at it and eat at it and eat at it. And it just really cannot get all the way through there, right? This is why, and I've had people bring this up, going back to the cat thing. That people bring this up, they're like, I've seen my dog and I've seen my cat do this, where they go out in the yard and they eat grass. It's like, if cats don't eat carbohydrates, why do they eat grass? Interesting question, but because grass is primarily made up of cellulose. So when you look at like the structure of, this is a leaf, but like, imagine this is a grass molecule. They're basically they're both made of cellulose. The structure here is actually so complex, the cat's digestive system cannot break it down. And so what will happen is it will pass through their digestive system basically unblocked. And that is how your pets naturally manage their hairballs, actually. That's how cats and dogs cut down on hairballs, so they don't get all that hair that's also not being broken down stuck in their digestive tract. And it's why dog food will sometimes you'll see like dog food will sometimes have oatmeal in it. They are adding oatmeal because oatmeal is very high in fiber, and the same thing is with cat food. They'll often sometimes add oatmeal to cat food as well. And that's where you'll see it'll be like, here's the hairball formula, for indoor cats. So there's your weird, non-personal training, but food fact for the day. So oats, barley, legumes, nuts, seeds, some fruits, and lots of vegetables. These things are going to have cellulose in them. They're going to have that fiber, right? And so these are complex chains of carbs that are so complex, your body cannot break them down. So what happens is they basically pass all the way through your stomach, they get all the way through the small intestine, and they make it all the way to your large intestine without being broken down. And that gives your gut bacteria something to feed on. And that's great because like they're able to stay alive thanks to the fiber, and they're able to eat on that. And then anytime you consume something that maybe was supposed to get broken down, but it just didn't really make, maybe just chemically it just didn't happen, maybe your digestive system was moving really fast. If you eat a lot of caffeine, that actually sometimes is the case. And so your digestive system is just pushing food through, and maybe it just, didn't have time to sit in the small intestine long enough to really absorb a lot of stuff, or maybe you didn't chew your food very well. And so, undigested chunks are working their way, and they make it to your large intestine. Your large intestine's like, all right, well, we got to get all the water out of this. We got to get all the electrolytes out of this, and we got to, dehydrate this thing so it can get out of the body as like waste. That gut bacteria is going to help break down anything that didn't get broken down previously, and there's just going to be, this is your last ditch effort for absorption of nutrients, right in that large intestine. And we use our bacteria in order to do that. And that's why it's so important to make sure that we have plenty of fiber in our diet, because we don't want undigested random freaking stuff sitting on the inside of our digestive tract. We want that bacteria to clean all that out. We want that fiber to grab anything and pull it with it, right? Think of this very similarly to our high density lipoproteins, right? That's the really dense stuff that's going through your blood vessels, cleaning your blood vessels out. That's what fiber is for. This is why when people like buy like cleanses and stuff, I tend to bristle a little bit. I'm not really a big fan of cleansing. Because like a lot of people are like, it makes you so much, it cleans out your blood and this and that. And it's like, it just doesn't. It does not get into your body, clean stuff out and then, work its way back to your digestive system and then, unclean your body. All most cleanses do, guys, is they cause like diarrhea, which is a great way to get stuff out of your body. But you know what a really good way of doing that as well is? Eating a high fiber meal. Go eat a freaking salad. Go get something that is full of cellulose and it will pull that out of your body. We really do want to make sure that we are getting plenty of fiber in our diet. The other huge benefit here, aside from just keeping your gut healthy and helping you avoid things like inflammation, which will cause gastrointestinal distress and things like that, another huge benefit to consuming fiber is the fact that like that gut bacteria, one of their waste products, their byproducts are these like short little fatty acid chains, which get into your bloodstream and are very, very, very good for your heart health. And this is especially true for everybody on this call right now, because this is we got a room full of guys here. Guys, prostate cancer, super, super, super common. And so one of the biggest reasons why it's really important to get enough fiber in your diet. So, invest in a high fiber cereal, eat that stuff every day. So let's take a look at, that's sort of the chemistry of carbohydrates. So let's go ahead and look at the functions. Like what are the role, like what do we use carbs for? Well, their primary job is to provide energy, right? Just like anything else, just like any of the types of foods, right? I mean, protein's mostly job is to facilitate, plenty of nitrogen for us to be able to have ingredients to repair the body. And then we can use it for energy, as sort of a last resort. But the big thing here is energy. And what's great about carbohydrates, again, is it's immediate energy. Remember, glycolysis is spitting out ATP super, 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 super rapidly. Whereas like fat tends to spit out large chunks of ATP kind of slowly, right? So definitely providing energy. We also consider carbohydrates protein sparing. This is a term that you're going to see thrown around sometimes. When we say that something is protein sparing, it just means that like I just said a second ago, your body tries not to use protein for energy production. It tries to use protein, as a source of like nitrogen to repair body tissues. But if it has to, it'll absolutely convert those amino acids right into glucose molecules so that you have energy. Because like, we got to, there's no way to keep the body alive if it's not producing energy. So that's priority numero uno. So if we're getting plenty of like carbohydrates in our diet, we are ensuring that there's never going to be any protein conversion happening there, right? So they're considered protein sparing, which means they protect the body from catabolizing protein for energy production. And I'm not just talking about protein in your diet, by the way. I'm talking about like, proteins that happen to be nearby. We know that low protein diets are associated, with like a lack of the ability to build muscle, but we also know that it will result in catabolizing muscle. So it'll reduce muscle size. It'll break down. A lot of times, low protein diets have been shown to cause gastrointestinal distress because their body cannot produce enzymes, and then those enzymes further reduce your ability to like digest food. So then you're even more nutrient deficient. We know it is associated with like a weak immune system. So there's definitely plenty of reasons to get protein in your diet, and we'll talk about it more. But if we know that protein's so important, we also understand that carbohydrates are important as well, right? And they're required to metabolize fats in order to support and maintain the caloric demands of exercise. So this is an interesting one, right? Fats, you will often hear this phrase that fats burn in a flame of carbohydrates. And you'll be like, well, what does that necessarily mean? Well, remember, go back to our energy systems, right? It starts with glycolysis before moving into your aerobic energy system. And we know, like, if we look at like, utilization of carbohydrates versus fats in sporting activities duration. There we go. So this is kind of what this looks like in terms of like intensity and what fuel source is mainly supplying that energy. So if your intensity is super high, right? This is like high intensity, you're working as hard as you can. Carbohydrates are supplying most of the energy for that. Why? Well, because of this other chart right here, which is showing you glycolysis, right? This is your short-term anaerobic system. High intensity is associated with short duration, right? You can work really, really, work really, really hard for like a really brief period of time, right? So if you're working really, really hard, you're mostly using carbohydrates as a fuel source because the muscles and things that you're recruiting, you're recruiting more and more and more of them. So those are going through that first bit of energy system. And they're spitting out ATP like crazy. Meanwhile, they're also spitting out lactic acid, which can be utilized by this other blue line, that long-term aerobic energy system that starts to take place underneath here, right? And so fats are more metabolized when your intensity is low. With low intensity, we tend to rely on fats as a fuel source. So, in the middle, you're kind of in the middle. So when we say that like fat burns in a flame of carbohydrates, we know that like by boosting up and doing like a lot of high intensity energy, you can produce some lactic acid in the background, right? And so now that lactic acid is going to support being a fuel source, to kick off metabolizing fat, right? And so now fat will come in and be able to like metabolize through that Krebs cycle and that electron transport chain. So having carbohydrates are actually a great way to be on like a fat loss diet, which a lot of people don't really think of. A lot of people think like, no, carbohydrates are what's making me fat, right? And that's just not 100% true. Another role of carbohydrates, carbohydrate-rich foods are often crazy packed full of vitamins and minerals, which are also essential for certain metabolic functions, right? So we look at like, sweet potatoes, right? We look at like sweet potatoes, which are absolutely a starchy, complex carbohydrate, right? Well, number one, we can already see like it's a bright orange color. So that's definitely going to have some like beta carotene in it. There we go. Actually, this is great. So here's like white potatoes and sweet potatoes, right? A lot of people think that like sweet potatoes are healthier than white potatoes or sweet potatoes are healthier than russet potatoes. Here's like, all of them are actually really, really good. It's just that this one happens to be more bright and colorful. And yeah, that means that it actually, has certain vitamins in it more than others. But make no mistake, this is an incredibly, incredibly healthy food. So let's take a look here. There's actually more calories in sweet potatoes than there are in like white potatoes. Protein content's about the same. Carbohydrate content is higher in sweet potatoes and lower in white potatoes. So if you are trying to go like low carb, you're going to be better off on this option over here. But yeah, that's not really something we need to spend too much time thinking about. Fiber, there's a little more fiber in the sweet potato. There's way more sugar, 4 times as much sugar, right? But then calcium, there's way more calcium, although still a decent level over here. Way more sodium going to be found in there. Remember, sodium is essential. In this case is good sodium. Magnesium levels are pretty close. There's actually more potassium in the white potato than there is in the sweet potato. Vitamin C in the white potato is crazy higher. I don't know how many more times 2 is than 337, but it's a lot. There's more folate found in the white potato. There's more choline found in the sweet potato. Now, there is a massive amount of vitamin A in the sweet potato compared to the white potato. Absolutely massive. So, again, both are actually really good for you. If you're vitamin A deficient, go with the sweet potato. If you're vitamin C deficient, go with the white potato, you know. Very, very, very different here, but both complex carbohydrates, both, you know, amazing properties that have really positive effects on us, right? So looking at that, right, we know that we already look at that, and that was a starchy carb. Let's look at whole wheat bread here. We'll do one more. Whole wheat bread nutrition. Let's find some fun facts about whole wheat bread. I don't want like whole wheat bread nutrition facts. I just want to find like a fun infographic. Let's try whole wheat bread. Let's try versus brown rice. Oh, wait, what about whole wheat bread, vitamin, mineral content? Try that. What's this one? Oh, here we go. Oh, that's totally what I want. Go back. Oh, please give me a high res version. No? Oh, you suck. So bread, you know, a lot of times people just think about the carbohydrates that are found in it, but there's a lot of really great vitamins and minerals found in breads as well. You know, if we look at like, that's enriched wheat flour. I don't want enriched. Enriched means that it'll be all messed up. So we can see like there's some B1, B2, B3, B6, plenty of fiber here, a little bit of protein. There's some iron, some phosphorus, you know, sodium, potassium. I can't remember what that one is. Is it an M? I guess that'd be magnesium if it's an M. So there's all the different like minerals that you're going to find in. There's all the vitamins. So, you know, bread, not as bad for us as we think, as long as it's like, you know, relatively simple, you know, bread, not processed like crazy where it's been stripped of nutrients, right? Yeah, the faster it's gonna mold, the better. You know, like that means that it's still like a relatively, you know, it's still food. You know, food that doesn't mold, I don't trust. You know, if a fungus isn't gonna eat it, why should I? So we want to make sure that we get plenty of that in there. So a really good source of vitamins and minerals. Adequate fiber intake, you know, is going to help with constipation issues and also reduce certain types of cancers and certain types of heart diseases. You know, soluble fiber, for instance, plays a significant role in the reduction of heart disease, right? Making sure that you have like fiber in your diet. And that bread's a really, really good source of fiber. That sweet potato is a really good source of fiber. This is where, you know, I grew up eating a lot of mashed potatoes, you know, but like, you know, and I grew up peeling those potatoes for my mom, but leave that freaking skin on there. That's the cellulose, right? That's the part of the potato that really can't be broken down. That's the complex part that's going to help, you know, keep the heart healthy. I outlawed my mom from skinning her potatoes years ago. I was like, no more, you're not allowed to use it. Threw her potato peeler away. But so very good source of energy there. Now, one of the things, they act as the primary source of energy for our nervous system. That's kind of an interesting one. Your brain loves carbohydrates. Absolutely loves carbohydrates, because carbohydrates, again, are an immediate source of energy, and your brain needs to think of things, I don't know, pretty quickly. And so like the brain, this is part of the reason why you tend to get a little hangry. It's usually because of low blood sugar levels. That's where your brain really tends to get kind of antsy, a little ticked off. I don't know if you guys are like me. If I haven't eaten in a while, I'm ready to kill someone.
That was me yesterday.
Yeah, yesterday, yeah. Man, I got to make sure that I have plenty of like, you know, I got to keep my blood sugar levels stabilized, right? But at the same time, we don't want to spike our blood sugar levels. And we'll talk more about that in later classes. But we look at like, you know, we look at your blood sugar levels. Basically, we'll want to keep you in a normal range. I can never figure out how to Google this chart. There we go. This actually isn't bad. You know, we want to keep you in a normal range. Imagine like, let's say, see these big peaks right here. Maybe that's a little too high, right? So let's say, we want to keep our level just below that, but we also don't want to go all the way down here to these valleys either. And so we want to say somewhere in the middle all day. When you get way too high up, that's going to facilitate, the storing of those carbohydrates as like fat tissue. And if it drops too low, that's going to cause you to get like hunger cravings, right? This is where we're going to talk. We'll talk more about this when we get to like, helping our clients manage like their food intake. But this is part of the reason why, like, it is important to make sure you have sugar in your blood, because your brain is going to make you, you're going to end up eating something you maybe don't want to eat or making some poor choices, the more like the lower your blood sugar levels are, Again, it is required to metabolize fats. So in order to facilitate beta oxidation, and beta oxidation is a precursor to fat being burned. We'll talk about that when we get down to fats here at the end. We need carbohydrates as a precursor to that Krebs cycle, right? Remember, glycolysis takes place underneath the Krebs cycle. And that is, again, where fat burns in a flame of carbohydrates. And then again, reduces your risk of certain types of cancers due to fiber's ability to kind of clean out your GI tract. It's going to pull that stuff with you. All right. So how many? All right. So we've made the case, right? We know that carbohydrates are important. How much of them should we eat? Right. Let's figure out like what's the appropriate carbohydrate consumption here, right? Well, obviously that's going to be based on your current body weight. First you got to figure out how many calories you're supposed to eat based on your body size. So we generally represent your carbohydrate as a percentage of your total caloric intakes, but it could also have a lot to do with like whatever your metabolic demands are for your health conditions or athletic events that you might be taking it. Like if you are sitting around all day, if you're not doing exercise, maybe you're on just like a very low intensity, maybe like it's a walking program, right? Very low intensity, just walking program. Well, hey, maybe you're actually going to do better off on like a lower carb diet, because if you're in low intensity, you're primarily relying on fat as a fuel source. But you do want to make sure you have enough carbohydrates to kind of facilitate the reduction, the burning of that fat. And so this is where we get into our AMDRs. I mentioned AMDRs the other day. This is your acceptable macronutrient distribution ranges. These are some of the numbers all of you guys are going to need to have memorized. This will likely be on your regular NASM test and on your nutrition test. There's only like 5 or 6 nutrition questions in your 100 question exam. It's not going to be that many, but we want to make sure we get all 5 of them right? So we need to have our AMDRs memorized. The AMDR for carbohydrates is going to be 45 to 65% of total caloric intake. So I'm on a pretty high calorie diet right now. I'm eating about 3,400 calories a day. So if I'm eating 3,400 calories a day and I need 45% of those calories to come from carbohydrates, I'm going to multiply that by 0.45. That's my 45%. That means I need 1,530 calories coming from carbohydrates daily at the minimum. But let's say I'm, the reason I'm eating so much is because I'm doing like a lot of really intense working out and my intensity is a little higher. Maybe I got to up that carbohydrate intake. So I take that 3,400 and now I'm going to multiply it by 0.65. That's totally the wrong number. What happened here? There we go. That's going to give me 2,210 calories, right? Now, how many calories are in a gram of carbohydrates? We know that there are 4, right? We talked about this the other day. 4 calories in every 1 gram of carbs. So if I take that 1,530 calories, I'm trying to figure out how many grams of carbs I need. All I need to do is divide this by 4, right? And that means that I'm going to get somewhere around 382 to 552 grams of carbohydrates per day in my diet if I am on like a very, internet's freaking out, high intensity program. So that's my current like numbers right there, which is pretty freaking high, right? So it definitely depends on like what type of like lifting and what type of like sport you're doing. But generally, the higher the intensity, the higher the carbohydrate intake. That being said, I find that if I go too high on the carbs, I do actually have some kind of a hard time controlling my blood sugar, and I go through like periods where I do get a little hangry. So I actually prefer to kind of be right around the 45 to 55% marker. I very rarely go up to 65%. If I were doing like, if I were training for like a marathon or something, I'd be way up here, but haven't really done a marathon in a long time. So that is sort of like what our, that's how we calculate that out, right? Now, you can see here's a slightly different way of looking at that, right? Rather than just calculating your calories and then kind of reverse engineering your carbohydrates, maybe instead you just figure out, you know, what your carbohydrate intake are per gram, you know, gram per kilogram of body weight, right? So I weigh about like, let's say, I think was it 70. No, that's not right. Wait. Yeah, 79. So I weigh about 79 kilograms, right? So what I could do if I were doing like, you know, an ultra endurance program, let's say I'm doing a marathon, right? Maybe I eat 12 grams per kilogram of body weight every day, right? So that's gonna be 12 times 79, 948 grams of carbohydrates. That's 3,792 calories just from carbs. But you think about like somebody who's doing a marathon. I mean, I only did like a 6-mile run yesterday, and I burned like 4,200 calories before the day was over, according to, you know, my little like calorie tracking watch. So like that's, you know, yeah, that's a lot of carbohydrates, but like that could be 45% of like the total energy intake, right? So there are different ways to break this down. If I were doing like, you know, very low intense activity, you know, where I'm really not burning through carbs that much, again, I weigh 79 kilograms times 3. That's only about 237 grams of carbs per day. Times 4 divided by 3,400. So for me, that'd be like 27.8% of my caloric intake from carbohydrates. So maybe if I am on like, you know, doing less than an hour of training a day and it's relatively low intensity, yeah, maybe I can drop my carbs down. So there's different ways you can break this down, guys. The AMDR is the easy one. It's like total calories times 45%. You know, you get the calories, you divide it by 4, boom, there's your grams. But here we start to look, this is a very different method of looking at it, right? And it depends on like what type of athlete you happen to be working with. Any questions on that? Did that last part make sense to you guys? Okay. So what are some of our sources? We've already talked about that, right? Whole grains, fruits, vegetables, those are your good sources, right? When I say whole grains, I'm talking about whole wheat bread, oatmeal, quinoas, things like that, right? Quinoa is a fun one because that's also a complete protein. That's a plant source that actually has a full amino acid profile, which is kind of cool. So that's exceptionally good for you. Quinoa is great, by the way, if you know how to cook with it. Although if you don't know how to cook with it, it's awful. I remember being like, everybody's just like, quinoa is so good for you. And I remember being like, yeah, but it's terrible. Like until I learned how to cook it. Now I'm a huge fan. Make sure you wash that stuff. Quinoa actually has this like outer powder that it produces on the outside of it that's like a defense mechanism. And if you don't wash that stuff off, it tastes really, 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 really bitter. So you just got to run it under a cold tap and rinse your quinoa, and then it's great. So make sure you're doing that. But those are all really good sources. Fresh, frozen, canned, or juiced fruits and vegetables. Yeah, you can get plenty of nutrition out of frozen vegetables. They're great. In fact, some frozen vegetables actually have a higher nutrient content than fresh vegetables. If you look at like fresh versus frozen broccoli, for instance, you will actually see broccoli will sometimes have, it'll be cheaper, and it sometimes actually has a higher nutrient density. Let's see here. What's this chart? This chart's what I want, right? Oh, never mind. This is like looking at, okay. But this is showing you like once broccoli is harvested, you can see like how, certain nutrient contents are going to change, right? Some of them actually do go up, but a lot of them go down. So you'll see like, God dang it, these are all prices. Come on, hook me up. Ugh, internet, you're killing me today. Anyway, certain veggies. Here's how I like to think about it. If a vegetable has like a skin on the outside of it, it's more likely to last a little bit longer when it's exposed to air. So if it's like Brussels sprout or like squash or something like that, that's going to have plenty. You can buy that like fresh, and it's probably going to have a higher nutrient density because it's just not oxidizing, versus like certain frozen veggies. They're frozen when they are at peak nutrient density, and so that kind of locks everything in, which is great. You can get some carbohydrates from dairy or dairy alternatives. There are carbohydrates found in, like I said, milks and things like that earlier. There are also your protein heavy carbs, which are kind of fun. Nuts, beans, and soy products. Soy, of which is actually also a complete protein, even though it is a bean, like a carbohydrate. These are all really good sources of like protein and carbohydrates, which is a win-win scenario, especially if you are on like a vegetarian or vegan diet. And then yes, sweets, desserts, and sodas, yeah, those are also going to be carbohydrate sources, but the ones we want to avoid. So in general, here's what you want to focus on. When you're trying to pick a carbohydrate, you want to pick the nutrient-dense options, not the energy-dense options, right? And this is going to be a theme that really starts today, but is going to continue through the rest of like this module. Energy dense is stuff that has a lot of calories in it. Nutrient dense is a lot of like vitamins and minerals, right? So you can have bread, but stay away from the white bread. Go with the whole wheat stuff. You can have potatoes. Make sure they have the skin on them, right? Making sure that we have lots of nutrients in our food should always be our priority. Now, talking about how we classify carbohydrates in terms of how they affect our blood sugar, this is where we got to talk about what's called your glycemic index. So the glycemic index is this chart that classifies how quickly certain carbohydrates are digested and absorbed by your small intestine. Because I keep talking about this idea of like making sure that something's complex, so it's broken down slowly, right? Well, when I'm talking about that, how do I know which foods are broken down slowly? Well, I'm talking about foods that are on the glycemic index. The higher it is, the larger effect it's going to have on your blood sugar. So like, here's an example of like our glycemic index. So, we're looking at maybe like Wonder Bread. It's actually extremely high on the glycemic index. It's so simple that your body is like, Wonder Bread, done, broken down, sugar, get into the blood, right? Instant. Versus we go down here, if we look at something that's like a little bit lower, we look at like tomato juice, right? Tomato juice is actually got a lot of like vitamins and minerals, got maybe some fiber in there, maybe just a little bit. It's just slightly more complex. And so because of how much more complex it is, it's going to enter your bloodstream slower, right? So, Coca-Cola is actually right in the middle versus like certain things that are like, more like God dang it, fruit, sucrose. Whew, God. If the more sucrose something has in it, right? Remember that's our table sugar. The higher it's going to be. So we do want to make sure that like we are slowing the absorption of certain things down, because again, we go back to that idea of like spiking our blood sugar. Like, you spike your blood sugar, your body is going to go into like processing mode. It's going to be like, man, we got to get this sugar out of the blood. Right. So then your body creates a bunch of insulin. That insulin triggers either the storage of those carbohydrates as glycogen, or it converts those carbohydrates into fat and stores them that way. If that happens, right, now suddenly your blood sugar levels maybe your body produces too much insulin because it's really sensitive, because we spiked our sugar levels so high. Well, now you are actually going to be low on blood sugar, and that's where food cravings start to happen. And then all of a sudden it's like, man, I really could use some more food here, even though you just stored a bunch of energy. And that's sort of the trap. Our body isn't perfect at all this stuff. We really were not designed to live in a world with access to this much sugar. And so because we are so good at spiking our blood sugar levels, anatomically, we're not really built to be able to handle it. So what ends up happening is we spike them and then our body processes them, but it overdoes it. And then our blood sugar levels fall and then we get food cravings and then we spike our blood sugar again and the cycle repeats. And that's why so many people like tend to like binge eat. It's actually one of the reasons why they say you should eat small meals throughout the day. That's sort of been the mentality for years now when it comes to diets. Like, don't eat big meals, eat small meals throughout the day. It's not because small meals are amazing. It is simply because it's easier to manage your hunger levels. And that's all thanks to that glycemic index. So really important to make sure that we are picking, generally low glycemic foods. Now, carbohydrates as a fuel source, like we said, in low to moderate exercise, carbohydrates are aerobically metabolized for energy. They support your aerobic metabolism, right? They initiate that aerobic metabolism. They initiate the anaerobic metabolism so that you can get to this maintenance point where you've got you're primarily metabolizing fat after that. So carbohydrates support your aerobic metabolism by supplying the initial glucose anaerobically, right? Then you've got that lactic acid, which can then, kind of kick off the Krebs cycle. And once the Krebs cycle is up and running, you can start metabolizing fat a little more effectively. Now, there is what is called the crossover point. And the crossover point is the point at which fats become the main source of energy. As duration increases and intensity lowers, fat becomes utilized for energy production more. Just before this happens, that is the fat burning zone that you see on treadmills. So you will often see treadmills will have this part where they go fat burning zone. You'll see little pictures on there, right? There's always some variation of this on every treadmill. And there's like the high, moderate, and low. And it's saying like the fat burning zone is here in this little green section, right? What they mean by that is it is the point right before it is official that you are burning more burning more carbs than fat. As intensity goes up, carb utilization goes up, right? So what we want to do is we want to keep our intensity relatively low so that we metabolize fat, right? Yes and no. Yeah, if you are trying to primarily burn fat as a fuel source and you're trying to train for that, great. You want to stay just below, you want to stay in that fat burning zone. But the thing is that fat burning zone is relatively low intensity and does not burn very many calories. So even though a percentage of fat is being burned that is higher, the number of fat calories is actually lower because 50% of 1,000 is less than 40% of 2,000, right? Those numbers are made up and do not correspond with actual numbers, but we will look at actual numbers when I have them later. But that's the crossover point. So, generally I tell people to recover in the fat burning zone and then get a calorie boost by jumping into primarily a carb burning zone. That is where we start to look at high intensity interval training, right? You get your heart rate really, really high and then you recover in that fat burning zone. And this is what that looks like. Carbs become glucose, becomes lactic acid, that then gets converted into acetyl-CoA, citric acid cycle. Meanwhile, fat can come in here, which we're actually not seeing, and then it can also go through that process. Now, how much glycogen do you have in your body? In general, the average person has anywhere from 400 to 600 grams of glycogen stored in your body at any given time, whether it's in your liver or within your muscles. That's about 1,600 to 2,400 calories. Ask any marathoner when they hit that around, anywhere between this range to this range, they call that hitting the wall. And hitting the wall is essentially where it's I'm out of carbs and your body is trying to shut down. It's usually right around mile 20 for most people. And it's brutal. And if you can get through it, then great. But it feels like sludge is just running through your whole body. So that's where it becomes really handy to get a much larger, this is where glucose tablets and shot blocks and things like that kind of come in. Now we also have our adipocytes. You look at a single adipocell, right? So, that's how many that's how much glycogen you got, 400 to 600 grams, right? 1,600 calories at the most, or 16 to 2,400. A single fat cell And remember, fat has 9 calories per gram, right? If glycogen stores are full, excess carbohydrates are converted into triglycerides, and then they are stored as fat. And a single fat cell can store about 90,000 calories of energy per cell. See that number, you start to realize how freaking difficult it is to lose body fat once we have stored that energy, right? Just a very energy stable molecule. And so you can work, it takes a lot of effort to, reduce the amount of fat in those fat cells. This is why we need to have about a 3,500 calorie deficit to result in about a 1 pound loss of fat per week. And some people are looking at it and saying it's even higher than that nowadays with some new research that's coming out. So we prefer to use them for our short duration. If you are an athlete, if you're doing high intensity, short bursts of activity, well, carbohydrates seem like they're going to be your main fuel source. If you are primarily relying on like low intensity, long duration, well, we're going to talk a little bit about fats here as well. So foods to include 0 to 4 hours before an event. Try to get some complex carbohydrates. Try to get some protein sources in there as well. Honestly, the best thing to eat before like an athletic event, a couple hours before, is like a beef and bean burrito. Or like just like a bean burrito. Those things are great. It's a super high source of carbohydrates, got some protein in it. It's awesome. And then get some fluids in there as well. And then 2 hours before, try to have like a light snack. If you get some fruits and things like that, that's a great way to supply you with immediately breakable energy, right? So you get the complex carbs underneath, and you get the simple carbs on top that can be broken down for immediate energy. So when you're trying to like figure out a carbohydrate plan, you got to consider your timing and ingestion, try to make sure that like you've got the right carbs coming in at the right time. Make sure that you are restoring glycogen after your workout. Do not just think that carbs are before working out. Carbs are also very essential afterwards, because what are you going to do about tomorrow's workout, right? So make sure you are restoring your glycogen stores. That's going to be huge. So carbohydrate intake for certain athletes can be as high as 55 to 75%, but in general, our AMDR, I know this is different than here, but in general, our AMDR is 45 to 65%. They're going to be classified into simple or complex. It's better to get some complex carbs a couple hours before your event. And then right before your event, it's good to get some simple carbs as an immediate source of energy. Glucose is the reason we are eating all these carbs, because glucose is what's going to go through that lactic acid cycle. The richest source of carbs are going to be, in terms of nutrients, are going to be your grains, fruits, and vegetables. So we like whole grains, we like fruits, we like veggies, because they are nutrient-dense carbohydrate options rather than just simply energy-dense carbohydrate options. And we can look at the glycemic index to determine like how much that's going to affect our blood sugar levels. All right. Any final questions about carbs, guys? Cool.
Nope.
Love it. Let's take a look at fats. So fats, and you can see some of these are like, those are a little carby too, but fats, right, are liquid fats. Those are like your oils, lots of protein here in the fish, but you can see it's very fatty as well, right? You can see the little bits of marbling in there. Nuts and seeds, all very, very, very good sources here. So fat, very vital nutrient, super important, right? Acts as a primary energy source for our moderate to light intensity. It's essential for like certain physiologic functions. When you got to make a new cell, it needs to have a cell membrane, and that membrane is made of fatty materials. And obviously it's very good for giving us enough energy. It's a great source of calories, right? This is our main source of energy during light to moderate activity, and also when we are at complete rest. So you're actually primarily relying on fat as a fuel source when you are sleeping. So the real fat burning zone is when you're in bed. But obviously you don't burn very many calories. So nobody take a nap at the gym. And they also are very important for making sure to like carry certain substances throughout the body. So again, what are fats? Well, these are organic compounds. They're made of carbon, hydrogen, and oxygen. They're the exact same ingredients found in carbohydrates, which is why they can be metabolized for energy the same way. It's just that they are a much more stable compound that is a little bit easier to metabolize over a long duration, right? So that's why when you were at rest or during light activity, this is the perfect fuel source. They supply, like I said, fatty acids, which provide a certain physiologic functions like making new cell walls. They protect your vital organs. Those cell walls need to be around the outside of your organs. You need to be insulating your organs with a little bit of fat. And they carry certain substances throughout your bloodstream, not just your vitamins, right? Although there are fat soluble vitamins, they're also carrying your hormones, right? We look at like testosterone and estrogen, cortisol, all these like different hormones, they get carried around thanks to fat. And then just in terms of like satiety, like making sure that it's easy to stick onto a diet, fats are highly associated with like making you feel full, Kenny, I think I saw you doing it earlier again. I think you were eating an apple at the beginning of this call.
Oh yeah, I always eat apples in the morning.
That's great. I mean, apples are incredibly, incredibly good for you. They're a really good source of like carbohydrates, vitamins, and minerals, right? It's funny. I can't eat just an apple by itself. If I do, it spikes my blood sugar and I get super hungry afterwards because my body's like, more. I need more carbs than that, right? So one of the things that I have to do is I have to make sure that I get a little bit of fat whenever I'm eating just fruit all by itself. And so I will often eat like an apple, but I'll often pair it with like a little bit of like cheese or nuts or something, which are really, really fatty. And the amount of fat that I'm getting in there is going to ensure that like I feel fuller longer. It's going to give my body a little bit longer to break stuff down. And that way I don't spike my blood sugar levels. It also enhances the sensory quality. Sometimes like fatty foods, they just taste good. We like the texture of a lot of fatty foods, there's nothing better. I know this is bad for us to talk about, but there's nothing better than like the greasy, fatty, meal. That hamburger is delicious for a reason. My roommate Seth had this great story recently where he was having dinner with a friend of his, and this friend had two other people over. It was this married couple, married French couple. I'm going to be a little unprofessional here while I tell this story, but I want to tell it accurately. But this guy was like, she was like giving him a hard time, and Seth was like, he was like kind of chime in. He's like, what are you giving him a hard time about? And she was like, tell him. He was like, he's this amazing, like, French chef. And she's like, tell him what your favorite food is. I have a terrible French accent. I apologize. But he's like, I fucking love McDonald's. And he's like, oh, all of the French chefs, what we do when we are done? We all go to McDonald's and have a cigarette. And it was like his favorite thing, like legitimately, like, he's like, there's nothing better than a McDonald's burger. They're like, he's like, I can make anything in the kitchen, but he's like, I go out for McDonald's with all my chef buddies. And it's like, I get it. McDonald's is super full of fat. Your brain is wired to tell you that it is delicious. It is not good for you by any capacity. But your brain is definitely wired to tell you that it's wonderful. We've been quoting that around my house all week. So when I say fats, right? And by the way, the AMDR, this is the number you need to have memorized. Your AMDR is going to be 20 to 35% total caloric intake, with 7 to 10% of your total calories coming from saturated fats. So we are going to break down the difference between fats here in just a minute. But in general, 20 to 35% of your energy should be coming from fats, but only 10% of your total calories should be coming from saturated fat at the most. Anything higher than that is associated with different heart risks. So when I say something is a fat, I am talking about lipids, right? And that's a little bit different than like body fat, right? We're talking about lipids here, right? The fats found in foods. These are your triglycerides, which are the energy producers, phospholipids, which are giving us cell walls, and sterols, which are things like our lipoproteins like cholesterols, right? So triglycerides are composed of a glycerol molecule, and it's got 3 fatty acids attached to it. That's why it's so good at producing energy. I can cleave that one off, I've got energy. I can cleave that one off, I've got energy. I can cleave that one off, I got energy, right? Phospholipids also have a glycerol backbone, but they also have a phosphate group, and that phosphate group makes them incredibly good at binding together and being afraid of water. So when you look at a phospholipid, the reason it makes up our cell walls is because it's perfect at propelling water on one side and keeping water out on, repelling water on the other. So you can see like this head here, right? This is what is called the hydrophilic end. This really likes water. And this end really hates water. So what'll happen, and this is why if you ever drop oil into water, right? If we look at like oil in water, the reason it does this is because, well, number one, it's lighter. It's less dense than water, so it's going to float to the top naturally. But the reason it is so good at like not mixing and it makes these big globules in here is because all of those individual molecules of fat are arranging themselves like this. The hydrophobic ends are facing inward, the hydrophilic ends are facing outward, and they just create this perfect ring, and that makes it very hard for water to penetrate, right? And then you have your sterols, which are these fatty acids with these little carbon rings, and that is a precursor to your steroid hormones. So when you are trying to make things like testosterone, you need to have sterols in your diet. And this is why sometimes like men with low testosterone, they'll look at their diets like you've been on a low fat diet, because maybe it's somebody who's been trying to be on like a weight loss program. You know, you see these low fat diets that are so used to be much more popular. Nowadays, like high fat diets are popular, but low fat diets have been popular for a long time because people go, oh, fat makes you fat, right? And so like they will avoid fat in their diet, and turns out it ends up resulting in low hormones. They have it with hormone deficiencies, and if you have that, you're not gonna be able to build muscle, right? And you're gonna end up storing fat more effectively. So let's go ahead and look at our fatty acids here. Let's look at those triglycerides in their different shapes, right? So you're either going to have saturated or unsaturated fatty acids, right? Your saturated fatty acids are going to look like this. Think of it as like seats at a table. When you look at them, they look like this, right? This is like, yeah, all the seats at the table are full, right? If they're playing musical chairs, there's nowhere to take a seat, right? Hydrogen's here, no empty spaces for hydrogen to kind of get in there. And so that is what a saturated fat is. Now, notice how it's kind of this straight shape right here. That's what makes saturated fat so good at being a solid at room temperature. When you look at a, actually, I'm gonna pull up this version. This is way better. You look at like saturated fat. That's like the marbling found on like, we find it in butters, which is relatively solid at room temperature. There's a lot found in milk, actually. That's why milk gets like the crusty ring on it. If you leave it out and sitting, and it gets like that scum on the top. We see, even like coconut milk is actually like very saturated, tends to be. There we go. You can kind of, actually, that's, there we go. Look at all that saturated fat, right? Tons of it right there. Your eggs, there's a lot of like saturated fat in there as well. So saturated fat is, like I said, it's solid at room temperature, and it's able to be solid because of this shape right here. It's very, able to stack itself very efficiently. Whereas unsaturated fats actually have spots for hydrogen to bind. There's actually space there. For hydrogen to like find a slot. And because they have these kinks in them, right, that kink is what gives them a space to sit. You can see that here in this picture, right? There's an unsaturated fat. Actually, sorry, I need this one right here. Do not pay attention to this middle one. This bottom one right here, right? That's an unsaturated fat, and it's got this little kink in it, right? It's got a little space for hydrogen to bind, right? This little empty slot right here. So that's your unsaturated fat. Now, there's two types of unsaturated fat. There's either poly or mono. And again, mono means one. So that means one kink versus poly, which means one or two or more, right? Poly for many. So there's many kinks, right? I'm sure there's jokes happening while some of you are muted. Like I said, saturated fat's typically solid. These are usually associated with like animals, right? These are animal sources, and they tend to be high in cholesterols because an animal's body assembled them, and that animal had hormones, right? Versus your mono and poly unsaturated, these have little spots in their chains, right? And so like, because they've got a spot, they are typically a really good source of our omega fatty acids. So your essential fatty acids, when we look at them, these are going to be your omega-3s and your omega-6s. These are very commonly associated. These are really, really great sources of them, right? You can find a lot of them in fish, avocado, certain eggs, like especially if that egg comes from a chicken that was fed like flaxseed. So when you look at like, these are more commonly referred to as DHA or EPA. Both of these are the types of hormones. These are omega-3s and omega-6s that you're trying to get in, and actually ALA as well. And they're really essential. Sardines, shellfish, algae is a really good source. And for those of you who like to eat seaweed, salmon, there are supplements. Walnuts are a really great one. Flax seeds are a really great one. And, you know, like cod liver oil is a really good one. But these are all really good sources. What's that?
Is it like the seaweed chips?
Yeah, those are actually a really good source of fatty acids. Yes.
Those are phenomenal.
Oh, God. I don't know how people do it.
They're amazing.
Dude, I grew up like running around in the Pacific Ocean. I swallowed way too much seawater as a kid to like go anywhere near that stuff. It's so salty.
Wow. And how much pee was in the ocean?
Oh, I know, right? Yeah. Nothing but. It's nothing but. So those are your essential fatty acids. Now, what are those essential fatty acids for? Well, remember, you've got those phospholipids, which make up your cell walls. Well, these essential fatty acids assist in that process, and you literally cannot get them. Your body can't reassemble stuff to make these types. It has to get them from your diet. That's why they're essential. There are others. There's other omega fatty acids that your body can totally make just fine. So maybe you get a saturated fat and your body's like, great, I don't need that. Breaks it apart, makes it into like an omega if it can. But these particular omega fatty acids your body cannot make. So you need to make sure you get them in your diet, which is why so many people are deficient in them, right? So many people do not get enough of these essential fatty acids in their diet. And that's why we see a lot of like, you know, heart problems, even like eye problems and stuff like vision and inflammation and joint problems and all things like that. Now, there is one more type of fat I know everybody's thinking about, but these are our hydrogenated fats, AKA trans fats. These are exceptionally bad for you. You have probably noticed by now that I do not like to tell people what not to eat. I try to avoid that type of dieting advice. This is the exception. Do not eat them. They are terrible. These are fatty acids that actually have had extra hydrogen atoms added to them, and your body just does not know what to do with it. It's like, that looks like fat, but I don't know what to do with it, right? Like, and it destroys your good fats. It actually, they are so undense. They go in, and once they get into your body, they attract other fat molecules, which destroys your good stuff. So you might have an omega-3 in your diet, and it's running around, and then it runs into a trans fat, and trans fat's like, hey, come hang out with me. Destroys it, right? Not good. So these are associated with what we call VLDL cholesterols. Those are extremely low density. We already know that low density cholesterols can be bad for us. These very low density cholesterols destroy the high density. They're so bad. So what the heck is a hydrogenated fat? That is, like I said, trans fats. So shortening, right? Lard, right? That's a very good example, right? They're found in butters. They are found in most fried foods. Again, McDonald's. Not very good for us. Onion rings, donuts, pizzas, things like this. Try to get as little of this stuff as possible. How do you make a trans fat? Well, if you take a good fat, if you take particularly like a lot of like mono unsaturated fats, right? And you superheat them. You bring them up to an extremely, extremely high temperature above their smoking point. They start to strip hydrogen, which is the number one thing, we're going to find lots of that in the air. They start to strip that hydrogen out of the atmosphere and add it to their chemical makeup. And so what that does is that it basically takes your kinked molecules and it straightens them out. Not good. That is hydrogenation, right? So we take this unsaturated fat, which had this little kink in it, and then we straighten it out. And now again, it's really great at stacking itself inside your blood vessels. So if you think saturated fats are bad, trans fats are much, much, much worse. And they used to be good fats. That's what sucks. You actually cannot hydrogenate a saturated fat, which is where cooking with coconut oil has gotten so popular in the last few years. One thing that we know about like the American diet is we love fried foods. We love to take vegetable oil, put it into a pan, superheat the crap out of it, and cook foods on really high temperatures so they get that crusty, greasy out exterior, right? Which is delicious. Like, I mean, I love KFC too. It's not good for us, but like, hey, being truthful here. And like, that is not awesome, right? And so in the last few years, it's gotten much more popular to cook with things like coconut oil. Now, coconut oil is higher in saturated fat, but because it's saturated fat, you cannot turn it into trans fat. So you can superheat it, you can cook on too high of a temperature, and it's not really going to cause too much damage. And then pour some olive oil on your food, as a dressing, please. That's very healthy. So that's what hydrogenation is. That's why you can, and you'll sometimes see it. You'll see partially hydrogenated fats. You'll see it on an ingredients list. You'll see a fat that says, boom, there we go. I don't know what food this is, but this is a lot of times how food label or food companies will hide the unhealthy nature of their foods. You will see the serving size is 4 cookies. It has 0 grams of trans fat. But then you look down here and it says partially hydrogenated vegetable oil and hydrogenated oils, which means that the reason the serving size is 4 cookies instead of 5 is because if they brought it to 5, all these numbers are going to go up, but the trans fat would probably end up at 1 gram. So the reason they picked a low serving size is because that means that they can round the number down, because it's probably like 0.5 grams of saturated fat or 0.4 or something like that. So partially hydrogenated vegetable oil means that it's made with like vegetable oil that they superheated and it created some trans fats. The great thing about that is that food will last forever. They say the only thing that's going to survive like a nuclear apocalypse is like the cockroaches and the Twinkies, right? Trans fats. They last a long time. That's why we invented them, by the way. We didn't know how bad they were. And I'm actually kind of glad they exist. They really have helped us ship food over long distances and create a world, like a modern world in which we're able to ship food all around. They just started playing with our health because we took it too far. So I already kind of talked about this a little bit, but your essential fatty acids, these are the impossible to freaking say scientific names, linoleic and linolenic. I did it. Those are your omega-3s and your omega-6s, right? EPA, DHA, try to get these in your diet as much as possible. Non-essential fatty acids, those are the ones that your body can make, right? Then we have our phospholipids, right? That is going to help with the emulsification process, and they're going to help transport things around your body and give you cell walls. And then we have our sterols. Sterols are when you look at a food and it says that it has cholesterol in it, right? These are found in both plants and animals. For instance, like soy has plenty of cholesterol. Let's see here. What's the cholesterol content of soybeans? Oh, no, that's right. They're actually cholesterol free. Blah, sorry. Cholesterol content. I knew that. That's the whole point of soy, actually. I have my fact literally memorized backwards. Cholesterol content, what was the high one? Zero as well. God dang it. Whatever. There are some plant sources, plant sources with cholesterol. Generally, they're found in animals. But you can find cholesterols in, oh yeah, there we go. Artichoke would be a great one. 0 milligrams there too. I'm totally off base today. This is why I always tell people like not to memorize like where you find stuff, but then you run into problems like I'm having right now. Anyway, generally cholesterols are found in animal plants, but there are sometimes sterols going to be found inside of some plant sources, right? And so what sterols are, like I said, they give you like different cholesterols, and those cholesterols can offer structure to your cells. Like a lot of times, like when you look at like a cell membrane, you will see like certain cholesterols on the outside. So that actually allows them to be able to bind to certain things. So like, you know, we need a cell to be able to link onto another cell. Well, it can actually use cholesterols to do that, right? And so you'll see like, you know, they just kind of make up a little bit of the structure of the wall there, which is cool. So we like cholesterols, right? The problem is we get way too much of the wrong types of cholesterols. Also, it's how you generate vitamin D inside of your body. Vitamin D, super essential for like utilizing calcium. So it's like, I need cholesterol to get vitamin D, and I need vitamin D to get calcium, and I need calcium to be able to, you know, structure my bones, right? Like, so, you know, this is another reason why like low cholesterol has been associated with like low bone density and things like that. But and it forms your steroid hormones, and it manufactures like, you know, your bile, which helps you further break down fats in your digestive system. So in general, we want to make sure that we do have cholesterols here. But like I said, there's the LDL, that's the low density stuff. This is your bad cholesterol. Now, LDL gives your cells like these different cholesterol proteins. So it's bad for us in high levels, but like, you know, it is a necessary part of our diet. And then we have the HDL, which is the really good stuff. This is your good cholesterols. So when you do have a high plant based diet, or when you do have like cholesterols that you are going to find in, you know, like fish and nuts and things like that, right? This is the good stuff, and this is the bad stuff. And the good stuff's job is to clean up, you know, cholesterols that might be running throughout your body and carry them to where they're going. So it really is kind of like pipe cleaner. I mean, honestly, it's there to scrub the inside of your blood vessels. And this is the stuff that gets destroyed by these VLD, the very dense lipoproteins, because this comes along to clean it up. And then it ends up like basically destroying the molecule because of how undense it is, and it attracts all these different parts to it and basically snaps it apart. So in general, your fat recommendations, and I know this is the most complicated out of all of them to memorize, but we got to get these numbers down. Total intake, guys, the AMDR 20 to 35%, 7 to 10% only from saturated. The rest of it should be coming from like unsaturated sources. And then trying to get this many grams of linoleic and linolenic acid per day. That's your EPA, DHA, your alpha linolenic and stuff like that. How the heck do you total all that up in your diet? Because a lot of times this stuff is not listed on nutrition labels. You really can't. But the best way to do it is to make sure that you're getting plenty of the good mono and poly unsaturated fats. In general, if they are about 10% of your total calories, with additional maybe 10% coming from saturated, you get an even split here, 10, 10, 10, that's 30%, which is right in the middle of your total fat intake. And that's pretty good. And that's my favorite way to try to like help my clients structure their fat intake. I like to aim for around 30, and I tell my clients, let's go with an even split, 10, 10, 10. And that means like much, much more olive oil inside of the diet. Generally cooking, if we're going to fry something, in coconut oil. And then, you know, if you want to use a little bit of butter for like flavoring and stuff, use it on the outsides rather than cooking with it, because that's going to make it much easier to like manage how much of it you're bringing in. And then try to get some nuts in the diet as well. Particularly nuts are really, really high in that DHA and EPA. And actually we can see that here, right? Here's like fish are the best versus, by the way, the fish are the best place to find this. You can see mackerel, flounder, shrimp, cod, salmon. But then you can see, you know, canola oil, not so much. But walnut and flaxseed, those are also really good sources. So really important for brain health, really important for everything, right? So where are you going to find your fats? Like, what are our sources out there, right? Well, whole grains are going to have a little bit. Generally, this is going to be unsaturated because, like, that grain is kind of like a seed in and of itself. So it has a little bit of fat in there, and seeds are just a really good source. If you're doing like croissants or biscuits, that's usually going to be really high in saturated and often trans fats because they bake them on really high temperatures. Let's see here. What is vegetable oils smoking point? I know it's low, but how low is it? 400 degrees. Yeah. So a lot of times we bake it Bake it 450 for however long, right? So that ends up like modifying those fats. That's why we see that in like biscuits and croissants. That's why those things tend to be like fluffy and crispy too, is because we're smoking them. Fruits and vegetables, usually very little fat content in there, although there is some, and then oils are the best source, right? Olive oils, such a good example. Flaxseed oil. But there's other ones like I love avocado oil. Avocado oil is incredibly good for you. Dairy products, those are usually going to be very high in saturated fat and cholesterols. Again, it's coming from an animal's body. Therefore, like an animal assembled it, that's why it's going to have so many cholesterols in it. Proteins, like I said, yeah, this is going to be about as much fat as you can, especially like red meats. Red meats are super high in saturated fats, right? Poultry is kind of in the middle. And then fish actually does have some saturated fat in it, but it mostly has like a lot of unsaturated fat. And you're going to do much better with fish that are like wild caught rather than farm. Now, I know some people are concerned about like different metals and mercuries and things like that are sometimes found in the water and, sometimes in like tunas and fish and things like that. Generally, a good rule of thumb, guys, if you are worried about stuff like that, chemicals that might be in like different wild caught fish and stuff, your best source is to pick a type of fish that is like a prey rather than predator. If it's a fish that eats other fish, that means that like, it's eating the things that are also swimming around with like a lot of those metals and stuff. That's the same reason why, by the way, we have so much cholesterols, right? We're an animal eating something that assembled cholesterols, right? And so now we're just boosting our own cholesterol levels because our body's making it and we're eating it. Anyway, so you're best off going with like salmon. Salmon are a really great example of like a fish that doesn't eat other fish. Shrimp are a really good source. Mackerel, sardines, things like that. Mackerel and sardines. Love salmon though. Got salmon for dinner tonight. Just got to know how to cook it right. So cholesterol is found in foods. Again, lots of sources in meat products, lots of sources in dairy and in dairy products, right? An animal's body assembled it. And then lots in like baked goods. Why? Baked goods are made with eggs and dairy, right? So again, going back to the animal thing. So when we're looking at our cholesterols and we're trying to figure out like what our levels should be, you've got to look at your total cholesterol. That's going to combine your triglycerides, LDL and HDL, and that's going to estimate your risk of heart disease. So we look at like cholesterol levels chart. When you look at it, these are generally what is recommended to be optimal, right? Somewhere less. For your LDL cholesterol, you want to be under 130 milligrams. Your HDL cholesterol would be above 60 milligrams. Triglycerides below 150. I know a lot of these numbers probably don't make sense if you've never looked at blood work, but if you are, getting very advanced into this and, helping a client like sort of interpret these numbers, right? We are not giving medical advice when it comes to stuff like this. We are not telling our clients, what to do about their cholesterol, but we can teach them the same type of things I'm saying right now, right? We know that there's good cholesterol. We know that there's bad cholesterol. Good cholesterol, you're going to boost it with healthy oils and fish and things like that. Bad cholesterol, you're going to boost it with lots of like saturated fatty acids and modified fats. So LDL, right? This is supposed to carry cholesterol to the cells, right? But again, we get too much of it. So this has been linked with cardiovascular disease because it starts building up and causing plaque on the inside of our blood vessels. Now, how do we use fat for energy during fuel? Well, it is a fuel for all of our muscles during, again, low intensity, long duration. It can be metabolized under gentle exercise. If you're a cardio athlete, you're probably relying a lot on fat. But again, there is that crossover point where here it is, fats go through beta oxidation. So what beta oxidation is, it basically cleaves off that glycerol molecule and leaves you with individual free fatty acids. Those free fatty acids get converted into acetyl coenzyme A or acetyl-CoA, and then that's what goes on through the Krebs cycle. Those electrons come off and they go through the electron transition, just like normal. So basically, rather than waiting for lactic acid to ferment into acetyl-CoA, we go through beta oxidation, and then that goes through acetyl-CoA instead. So we like to have fats in our diet. Again, it's going to help us if you're playing soccer, the sprint, you're going to get that from carbs. You're going to make a play, and then maybe you score or something. And then you're jogging around for positioning for the rest, that low intensity jog, or even walking that sometimes happens in between points, in between scores, is going to be, that's your fat as a fuel source. So we like a good combo here, right? So before exercise, try to get like a low fat meal somewhere between like 4 hours before. You try to limit it so that you can primarily rely on carbs, right? And then after exercise, you also want to kind of limit it, because like fat actually needs to be processed first, even though it's the one that takes process the longest. So if you're trying to like post-exercise, get as much protein into your body as possible, as fast as possible, fat could possibly slow that down. So try to keep your fat intake to a minimum, put right after exercise, but then after the rest of the day, make sure that you're, fatten it up. I like to have plenty of fat in my breakfast if I'm working out in the afternoon. But I like to have plenty of fat in my dinner always. If I'm working out in the morning, I go a little bit of fat before, but I try to avoid as much fat as possible right after my workout. By the way, that does not mean you need to find a fat-free protein shake. When I say like limit your fat, and you see like a protein shake, a lot of whey protein. Most whey protein, because it's made from dairy, right? You'll notice God dang it. Yeah, most of the time this is pretty standard whey right here. Actually, it's a little bit of high carb whey here. But yeah, about 2 grams of fat on average. This is a little high in carbs compared to some that I've seen. And then usually about 24 grams of protein. So that's a pretty standard, boring old, regular old whey. All whey for the most part, guys, has like the same macros until you look at the other ingredients. Like whey itself will, always be pretty much the same thing as a base ingredient. So fat, super essential, super vital. Its structure is going to determine its categorization. Do we call it saturated? Do we call it unsaturated? Right? High fat diets have before exercise have not been shown to improve your endurance. It comes much more from the fact that like you have fat in your diet as a total, rather than just like a lot of fat right before physical activity. And then fat intake during exercise, not actually super important, because we have a lot of fat stores on our body. So don't worry too much about getting like getting a lot of fat before physical activity to boost performance. It's really not going to work that way, unless you have like 0% body fat. Although if you have 0% body fat, we are worried about other stuff. All right, let's look at proteins here. Proteins are the ones everybody wants to talk about. Honestly, it's actually, and as complex as protein can make itself, which is crazy, right? Honestly, protein is one of the easiest ones to talk about. So good protein sources, you can see cheese, dairy, fish, shrimp, eggs, nuts, beans, and then obviously just regular old meat, right? So these are also complex chains of these are complex chains of amino acids. Now, amino acids are compounds made of carbon, hydrogen, oxygen, but what makes them unique is that they have nitrogen. That nitrogen is what allows them to make all these really cool shapes. I mean, don't be wrong, carbs can make some cool shapes, right? Like I said earlier, amylose and pectin are different looking than each other. Galactose looks different than, cellulose. But for the most part, like there's only so many shapes they can make, and they all kind of look like carbs. Fats are really simple. They all look identical to each other, like other than, saturated and unsaturated. But proteins, good God, proteins can make themselves into any freaking shape in the world. Like it's amazing. Like the most complex, really cool freaking molecules that are out there, right? So these are constantly broken down. They are constantly being reshaped and made into something new, right? The enzymes in your spit are a protein. Your DNA is a protein. The little pumps and channels, the stuff we see on the outside of cells, your cholesterol, as I talked about earlier, those are lipoproteins. They're in so many, actin's a protein, myosin's a protein, troponin's a protein, tropomyosin's a protein. There's so many different types of proteins, right? And so, when we're looking at this, these amino acids, they're held together with what we call a peptide bond, which is what makes them so easy to kind of, break them and reassemble them in like these, very cool different shapes. But you have to be able to actually, do that. And that's why we have like a digestive system that is full of acid, because that acid's great at breaking those peptide bonds. And then, so that's what's going to kind of link those things together to form like different proteins. You can see that right here, right? This is a generic protein, and then there's this little R group here. That R group can have 20 different variations. And so here's the difference between glycine and phenylalanine. They just look ever so slightly different each other because their R group is shaped differently. So now you can sort of assemble them. And here's the thing, just like, if you think about like, what if we only, we only have, actually, this is not a bad analogy. We look at like, the numbers, right? We got 0 through 10, right? And then everything is just a combination of that, right? There's, 0 through 10, and then we have 2 ones in a row, and then we have a 1 plus the second number, 12 and 13. They're all just the original like 10, right? We only have 10 digits. Actually, not even 0 through 10. I shouldn't even say that. We have 0 through 9. We only have 9 digits there, right? But we can assemble them in an infinite number of ways to make an infinite number of numbers. My roommate, who is a math major, would be slapping me in the face right now. Like, you don't understand infinity. But that's crazy, right? Well, that's how our proteins are. We can assemble them in so many different ways. So the shape of that protein is going to determine its function, whether it's a bone, ligament, tendon, hair, fingernails, muscle, teeth, enzymes, organs, whatever, right? Doesn't matter what type of tissue. Pumps, receptors, channels, all the things inside cells, those are all proteins. So pretty sure I've made my point by now, or probably made a long time ago. Pretty freaking important to have protein in your diet. And then one of the most important one are making your own enzymes, right? So they enable us to function. They can metabolize to rebuild the body, and their shape is going to determine what they are. Enzymes, these are the catalysts for creating certain biochemical reactions. So remember when I talked about how we've got the ATP-PC system? And we've got like, creatine kinase, which is able to kind of, kick off the phosphate from the creatine and re-add it to an ATP molecule, right? So you have like ADP, we lose this last phosphate here. This picture is actually not helping me at all. Let's use this one. So you got ATP, which breaks it off, and now you're left with ADP, right? But you've got creatine, which has a little extra phosphate, and creatine kinase adds its phosphate to reattach it and make a new molecule of ATP. That creatine kinase, that's an enzyme, which means it's a protein, right? Which is how your body's able to make creatine naturally. Although we can boost our levels by taking it through supplementation, right? So it enables your immune system to produce antibodies. It does so many freaking things. We love proteins, right? Again, muscles, enzymes, hormones, antibodies, your acid balance, your fluid balance, energy, and it can be used for energy, and then obviously like cholesterols and things like transport throughout the body. So when we talk about this, we need to make sure we have plenty of protein in our diet. But when I say plenty of protein, what I really mean is we need plenty of amino acids, and we need a complete amino acid profile. Without enough amino acids, we cannot do any of this, right? You need all 20 in order for it to happen. So that's where we have the term essential amino acids, which are the ones your body cannot make, right? These must be obtained from your diet. These are associated with what we call complete proteins. Complete proteins are protein sources that have all of the amino acids, right? So like, for instance, any animal's product, right? Any, your proteins inside of your body are complete proteins. If someone were to eat your foot, it would be a complete protein. Anybody else who's listening to you guys is like, man, this guy's weird. So, those are complete proteins, right? Because your body assembled all 20 of them into a U-shaped something. The enzymes in your body, the channels in your body, every protein you've got in your body is a complete protein. So that means that it has every amino acid. So it's essential that you get certain ones because your body can't make other ones. So if you eat, and these are all the essential ones, right? Histidine, isoleucine, blah, blah, blah. There's tryptophan, by the way, that's found in turkey. That's the one we always talk about. It's like the one that makes you sleepy. It doesn't actually make you sleepy, by the way. Overeating makes you sleepy. At Thanksgiving, generally the house tends to be really warm. It tends to be very intellectually stimulating. And it is associated with overeating, which spikes your blood sugar, which causes your blood sugar to crash. That's why everyone gets tired at Thanksgiving, not tryptophan. Tryptophan is associated with like, helping with like the production of like sleep and stuff, which is what led people to go, oh, tryptophan's and what makes you sleep, because there's higher levels of tryptophan in turkey. But remember, it's an essential amino acid, which means it's found in every animal source, which means every animal source would make you sleepy. So sorry, myth busted. And then we have our non-essential ones. These are actually, they can be produced by the body. So let's say I'm missing some aspartic acid. Well, my body can take, let's say, tryptophan, break it apart, reassemble it, and make aspartic acid. So those are your non-essential. They're typically associated with incomplete proteins. If you have a whole bunch of non-essentials, that would be what we call an incomplete protein, right? And there are some that are conditionally essential, which are non-essentials that become essential when it's like, you really do run out after a while. Generally, your body can make these, but like under sustained low protein diets, they may become like conditionally essential, and those are your tyrosine and cysteines. Now there are BCAAs, branched chain amino acids, which are actually able to be metabolized for energy directly within your muscles, which is pretty cool, and are often highly associated with like protein synthesis and making new muscles, right? Which is what led to people thinking, oh, well, if we put this in like a supplement, people will build muscle more effectively. And I believe that it has happened, but generally that is in people who are not getting good sources of protein in their diet already. BCAAs are a great way to fill in the gaps if you are not getting them from your diet. But there's only so many of them that you can use. So if you've got a really healthy diet and you add BCAAs into it, it's not going to do anything. It's a waste of your money. If you have a really bad diet and you add BCAAs, it could result in more protein synthesis. So, but then again, you're spending like $30 a month on BCAAs now. So why not spend that $30 a month on getting better sources of protein in your diet every week? This is like the big debate. This is where supplements come in. I'm not anti-supplement, but I'm not anti-supplement, but I know that I'm not pro-supplement. So sometimes that is viewed as being anti-supplement. I am pro saving money, and that I definitely know is true. So it kind of depends on how these things come to pass, right? So if you're getting plenty of complete proteins, do you need your BCAAs? In my opinion, no. What are complete proteins, right? They're the ones that have all those amino acids, the essential ones, in high amounts. Animal sources, every single time, guaranteed. Again, an animal assembled them. But there are some plant ones. Soy is a really good example of a complete protein. Love certain soy products, right? The things they are freaking doing with soy nowadays is amazing. Whether or not it's healthy is kind of a different conversation. But the way they're making them taste and making like soy products more approachable. I mean, like garden burgers used to be awful, and now they've got these amazing, Beyond Meat and Impossible Burgers and stuff, and it's pretty cool stuff. Again, whether it's healthy, that's a different conversation. But like, absolutely amazing in terms of tech. Certain grains like quinoa, tempeh, things like that, those are also complete proteins. Soy milk is a really great place to get like protein. So, these are really good sources of complete proteins. It doesn't always have to be an animal product. There are high quality proteins, which is basically a protein that has good digestibility and all the amino acids. Honestly, best example of this, whey protein. This is the one supplement that I will always talk about in a very positive light. Whey protein is a great way to ensure that you are getting a very easily digested, and very high, full amino acid profile. So love certain whey proteins that can be incredible for you. But again, actually, you don't need them. I mean, if you have like plenty in your diet elsewhere, you can be fine without them. Incomplete proteins, this is one that's missing some of the amino acids. Doesn't necessarily mean that they are bad for you, right? It sounds so negative, like incomplete protein, right? But generally, plant sources are a good example of this. Here's the thing, you can put them together. Put two of them together and you can make a complete protein. So by combining two incomplete proteins, you can absolutely make a complete amino acid profile. Beans and rice is the perfect example of that. So complementary protein pairs. Right. So any of my vegans out there, there's great ways to make sure that you're putting things together and it will make a complete protein, right? So beans with whole grains or nuts with whole grains or nuts plus beans, all really great ways to make sure that you are filling in your amino acid profile. And it kind of looks like this, this plus this, right? And it fills it all in. So we love that, right? That's great. Now, and there's an example, yeah. Plus any of these. This is the same chart, just looks different. Now, here's the thing. When I say we need to get protein, right, what I'm talking about is we need to make sure that we have, again, they're built on the element of nitrogen, right? That's what allows them to have their unique shapes. So when I tell someone how many grams of protein to get, what I really mean is that they need to have a positive nitrogen balance. A positive nitrogen balance occurs when the dietary intake of nitrogen, in the form of protein, equals or exceeds the output of nitrogen in terms of cellular damage. Even if you don't work out, guys, you are going to create some type of cellular damage. Your body's hot, proteins are going to get destroyed. Your body does work, proteins are going to get, your antibodies like fight some type of virus or something, proteins are going to get destroyed. Cells get old, proteins are going to get destroyed. It just happens, right? So generally, the amount of protein necessary is going to be to maintain that positive balance, or at least equal it, is going to be 0.8 grams per kilogram of body weight if you are sedentary. So again, I told you I'm 79 kilograms, right? So if I multiply that times 0.8 on a day where I'm completely sedentary, the minimum amount of protein that I need in my diet is going to be about 63 grams of protein during a sedentary day. Now, if I worked out the day before that, my body's still repairing all this damage I created, so we're going to need higher levels than that, right? If I'm going for weight gain, let's say I'm trying to put on muscle mass, I might take that as high as 2 grams per kilogram. So 79 times 2, that means I need a bare minimum of 158 grams of protein per day to ensure that my protein synthesis meets or exceeds my protein destruction, right? I need to make sure that I'm getting plenty of it. So in general, guys, that is going to give us an AMDR of around 20% for protein. We'll see a different number here in just a minute. But, now if I did just do 20% straight, right? Let's say I just said 20%. Remember, I'm eating a 3,400 calorie diet times 0.2. That's 680 calories from protein divided by 4. That's about 170 grams, which we saw is greater than the 79 kilograms times 2. It's about 12 extra grams of protein per day. That's fine. 12 extra grams of protein is not going to hurt me. So that's right around where I need to be, right? To ensure that like I've got enough protein to repair any cellular damage that I may be creating with my super hard workout. So how do we determine how much protein? The factors that affect it, well, number one, it's how much protein you are, right? You weigh a certain amount, that's how much protein we need, right? It's based on your body weight, and it is based on how much you are destroying those proteins. You know, sedentary individuals, they don't destroy very much protein, but it is based on their body weight. Weight gain athletes, team sport athletes, endurance athletes, strength athletes, right? All of these types of athletes could possibly destroy their proteins because like their muscles are working. They're, you know, you do a lot of work that creates a lot of lactic acid. That lactic acid burns your muscles. Hey, also you gotta remember, like it's the sliding filament model, right? Actin's grabbing, you know, or myosin's grabbing actin, right? Hand over fist. Picture you, right? If you had like a rope and you were just pulling it all day and then unloading, you know, your hands are going to get destroyed, right? They're going to get really raw by the end of the day. Anybody in here who's ever done rock climbing can tell you, you know, it's the number one thing to get destroyed like crazy. The more you're doing that, the more protein you need. If you ever really want to understand this, my favorite way to make this really instantly clear to a client, there's one particular type of person who needs an extremely high protein diet in a hospital. And those are burn victims. They will sometimes eat as high as 4 grams per kilogram of body weight. And the reason they eat so much is because like they just experienced some type of traumatic event that destroyed a substantial amount of protein on their body. And so like when you're trying to get like a skin graft to take and you're trying to like get the immune system to like repair all of that cellular damage, they will up the protein intake like crazy to ensure that the body has enough materials to kind of repair all that damage. So that's one thing that we look at. I know it's horrifying. I know it's a very sad thing to bring up, but if you want to make like protein intake understood instantly, that's a great way to just visualize it. So it's based on your current body weight, it's based on your total energy intake, and it's based on your desire to either gain or lose weight. You need to increase your protein intake based on like whether or not you are losing or gaining weight. But even if you're losing weight, which means like, yeah, I'm trying to get rid of parts of my body, right? You want to have your protein, you don't want to lose muscle mass, right? So you want to make sure your protein intake is still relatively high. And then another thing to consider is, well, what is your carbohydrate ability? If you do have a low carb diet, again, your body prefers to use glucose as a fuel source, and it can convert protein into glucose. It tries not to. It tries to avoid doing that as often as possible because it would much rather use that protein to repair body tissues. But if it has to, it will. And so if you have a low carbohydrate diet, you may need a higher protein diet. But why? Also, protein's expensive. Like that's the stuff that you spend money on at the grocery store. A bag of potatoes is like what, $3-4? And you get like a 5-pound bag. You know how much 5 pounds of chicken would cost? Ugh. Anyway, so factors, you know, your exercise intensity, your exercise duration, your training, your fitness level, right? And I would say like the more muscle mass you have, these numbers are even going to go up, you know? Two people who weigh the same amount, but have vastly different protein needs because maybe one of them has 10% body fat and the other one has 20% body fat, but they weigh the same, right? Well, one has way more muscle mass than the other one does. So they're probably going to need a greater amount of protein. And then you always want to consider like, what's the quality of your protein, right? Animal products are great because they have all the amino acids in them. That's a complete amino acid profile every time, guaranteed. Vegetarian athletes, they got to make sure that they are pairing their proteins effectively to ensure that they are getting the right amino acid profile. Your age is going to be important. Youths are going to need plenty of protein to make sure their body can grow. But make sure you're not going crazy excessive with your protein. Your total calories, it really shouldn't exceed 35%. If I were to take my protein intake up to 35%, so again, 3,400 times 0.335. For me, that'd be 1,190 calories divided by 4. That would be 297 grams of protein per day. If that doesn't completely murder my wallet, it will completely murder my kidneys. I'm picturing how expensive that freaking be. But this can actually have, negative effects. It can lead to dehydration because basically your body's going to need to convert all that protein into glucose to use it as a fuel source. And if it does that, that can often lead to dehydration. That dehydration can lead to additional stress on your kidneys. It also results in increased urea production, that stuff that we saw in pools. And that urea has to also be processed by your kidneys, so that's more work. It is associated with high risk of cardiovascular disease and different types of cancers. That's not necessarily the protein's fault. It's just that the high protein often comes from animal sources. Animal sources are often high in saturated fat. Saturated fat is associated with cardiovascular disease and cancers. So that's kind of in a roundabout way. It's not really protein's fault, but it's like the protein source's fault. It can also result in excretion of calcium from your bones. This is kind of an interesting one, but you can actually reduce your bone density, even though protein is necessary for keeping your bones. If you actually go way too high on it, because there's a lot of like sodium in there, they really like to like bind to each other. And so it actually results in less calcium getting to your bones. So then you're living your normal everyday life and, bone tissue gets destroyed just like any other tissue. And then you're not repairing it because it's basically just like attaching itself to your proteins instead. So not awesome, right? So what are good sources? Meat, fish, poultry, eggs, legumes, nuts, seeds, all of them. Great sources of protein. Whole grains too. They're relatively low levels. I mean, we look at like whole wheat pasta. I gotta remember to always put nutrition. We look at whole wheat pasta's nutrition facts. Yeah, it's got some protein in it. It's not crazy, right? But like 3/4 of a cup. That's not right. There we go. You look at like 2 ounces, right? A classic serving of pasta. 1.5 grams of fat, no saturated, 43 grams, so very high in carbohydrates, 4 grams of fiber, it's pretty freaking good, and 6 grams of protein. It's not super high, but it's not bad either, right? So, decent. That's a very healthy food. We like whole grain pasta. Fruits and vegetables, usually very low amounts of protein here. I know you'll hear people say like, oh, there's a lot of protein in broccoli. Yeah, not really. I mean, there is compared to like some other vegetables, but like sometimes you'll see this picture here. Beef will have 6 grams of protein for every 100 calories. Broccoli will have 11 grams of protein per 100 calories. Yeah, that's great. I love that. Here's the thing. What does 100 calories of steak look like? 100 calories of steak. Yeah, that's about right. About that big, right? Not very large. What does 100 calories of broccoli look like? That is going to look something more like that. So if you're trying to get your protein from broccoli, you are going to need to eat a lot of broccoli. And it's going to take you all day. So they contain minimal amounts of protein. That's kind of a moot argument. Sources of protein that are also fairly good: skim milks. I mean, all milks are going to be good in protein. Low-fat yogurts, cheese, soy, and soy milks, and different types of soy yogurts. Those are really rich sources of protein that are relatively healthy. Because the low-fat versions, they don't have as much saturated fats in them, although they do still have like certain cholesterols. If you do want to get like a super like high in protein but like low in everything else, milk. One that I really like is called Fairlife. fat-free milk. If you look at like this this Fairlife stuff, I'm kind of a fan of this stuff actually. Like they're basically, it's just an ultra super filter. It's expensive, but it's really, 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 really crazy filtered. So because of how filtered it is, you'll actually see what's the fat-free one. This is not the right label for this picture. Whose website is this? Walmart? Walmart, you screwed up. It'll look like this actually. You can see it's actually higher in protein than most milk, because like they're able to keep the protein through like their filtration process. And then if you look at like regular skim milk, you'll find regular skim milk has about 12 grams of sugar. This is about 6 grams of sugar. About 8 grams of protein. This is about 13 grams of protein. So I'm actually, I don't know, I'm actually kind of a big fan of this in terms of like the skim milks that are out there and stuff. I actually don't drink their skim milk. I actually drink their whole milk with DHA in it. So this one right here. So this is the one that I really like. It still has saturated fat in it, and really high levels, by the way. That's a lot of saturated fat. But again, 6 grams of carbs, which is pretty good. 13 grams of protein, and then this one happens to have omega-3s in it because the cows that they're getting it from are fed like flaxseed and stuff. So I'm a big fan of that version. Tastes really, really good. And dairy is not exactly that great for you. But like, I gotta have it in my coffee. I have to. I'm uncompromising on that. All right. So looking at protein shakes and things like that, you'll hear a lot of things where it's like, it has an increased muscle building capability, or it'll give you more endurance, or it'll help you recover from exercise. Maybe it could if you have low protein elsewhere in your diet. If you have low protein and all of a sudden you start taking whey protein and you suddenly are getting the right amounts every day, guess what? You're going to be able to synthesize new muscle. If you're having trouble recovering because you just can't create that cellular damage, but then all of a sudden you get your levels back to normal, guess what? You're going to have more endurance. Guess what? You're going to speed from recovery. All that's true when we are low in protein, Again, do you need it? That's a different argument, right? Could you get it from bars, shakes, and powders and pills? Yeah, you could. Do you need to? Not necessarily. I do like whey protein supplements. I like them because it is a great way to ensure that you're getting enough. It's a very easily measured thing. You can total up all your calories for the day and be like, oh, I'm 20 grams short. Boom, powder, shake, bring it to you with the gym, drink it on the way in the car home. It's very easy, right? I like stuff like that. I like ease because it's a great way to stick to like a diet program and be healthy at the same time. But again, there are risks, right? A lot of times, a lot of artificial sweeteners and artificial flavors, which can cause allergic reactions, and they are associated with different types of cancers, found in a lot of protein supplements, right? So generally, when I'm looking for a whey protein, the way I do it is I look for whey protein without artificial sweeteners. I'm going to look for something like this. This is actually the brand that I really like. It's like a grass-fed, whey protein source. So those are the one. There's a lot of them out there. You don't have to go without. The reason I like this brand is it generally tends to be, I also look at this. I'm not looking at how many calories I'm buying per dollar. I'm looking at grams of protein I'm buying per dollar because that's what I'm using it for. And I find that this is a very high amount of protein for every penny that I'm spending. The other one that I really like is, that's the right company, that's the wrong protein. This has artificial sweeteners. I don't know why it's in this picture here. You know what? This has artificial sweeteners and it's got sucralose in it, but they make one that does not. Killing me, Smalls. There it is. This one right here. They do make it without sucralose in it. So this one's got, and this one right here. This is the one I usually buy as the bag because it's a little cheaper. This one's really good. Lots of protein. It's an isolate, which is nice, which means that like it really is just almost pure protein. It has very little carbs, very little fat in it, and very high levels of protein compared to the normal 24 grams that we see. So big fan of it. It's got stevia in it. If you do not have a problem with stevia and it doesn't taste like chemically to you, it's totally a natural source. It's just that sometimes it's so sweet that some people don't like it. But I do recommend something like that personally. So how much protein? What's the necessity, right? Well, again, enough. That's the right answer, right? How much protein do I need? You need enough. That's not a very specific answer, but it's true. You need enough protein to repair any cellular damage that you're creating and prevent muscle loss, right? So make sure you're getting plenty of amino acids prior to training to make sure that like you don't ever, run out of that amino acid pool, and then make sure you're getting plenty of protein afterwards as well. This is where like a slow digesting carb with a little bit of protein helps you before athletic events, and a fast digesting protein after is recommended, right? So 1 to 4 hours, maybe 2 to 4 ounces of like lean meat is going to be consumed, or a protein beverage, right? And then right afterwards, 6 to 20 grams of a highly bioavailable amino acid profile is recommended. Really doesn't need much more than that, guys. What they have found is like, and I usually like, there are times where I'll have like 50 grams in a shake just because I'm trying to get enough protein in there. The whole maximum absorption thing, you don't have to worry too much about that. That's, your body is going to continue processing stuff. But generally within about 90 minutes, you want to try to get anywhere from 6 to 20 grams at a bare minimum of high quality protein. Again, whey is a really good example of just being able to do that instantly. We like convenience because, again, you could create the world's greatest diet, but if you cannot get it convenient enough for someone to do it, it's not going to happen. That's why I like protein shakes, not because of their nutrient content, but because of their convenience content. In summary, right, we need plenty of protein to repair our body. You get 20 20 different amino acids, some of which are essential, some of which are non-essential. Non-essential doesn't mean that you don't need them. It just means that your body can make them. So try to get as a complete amino acid profile. Dairy and alternative foods are a really good source, although not necessary. And then, your needs are going to be on an individual to individual basis, right? But try to get, a high quality protein somewhere between like 90 minutes to, an hour to 90 minutes after your workout. And that's the best way to ensure that you've got plenty of protein coming in order to facilitate the repair of everything. And that's it. That's the second biggest PowerPoint in the entire PFT program. We got one more really big one tomorrow that moves way faster. But how you guys feeling? Andres, Kenny, Charlie?
It felt pretty good, not too complicated.
Yeah, right. I mean, like the thing is, we've kind of discussed a lot of this in chunks. We just put it all together today.
Yeah, it was kind of repetitive, huh? Like some of the previous classes too.
Right. Yeah. So that's the thing. Like, and the reason, this is what it's like in the real world. Like, for those of you who have done like a little bit of like coaching or worked with like clients before, Andres, I know you've done like massage and stuff, right?
Yeah.
You get a lot of the same, like you don't get a lot of the same questions. You will get different questions, but what's funny is like, because the body only works so many ways, right? And we know that it works, you end up having a lot of the same answers. And so like, that's why this stuff tends to be kind of repetitive, because you're like, it's like, well, what about like this scenario? Well, remember how we said this a long time ago? That falls under this scenario as well. What about this? Yeah, same answer, right? Like, how much protein do I need if I'm a runner? This much. How much protein do I need if I need a weightlifter? This much, right? So it's like, this is almost like your cheat sheet for the general nutrition stuff that you're going to end up repeating to your clients. This is the main pieces of information. So it should feel familiar. this is from what I've been told, and this is, this is not something that I say, but I've had previous students tell me this page of notes. Remember, you guys get to take your FNS open book. So I've been told that a lot of people who print these notes, these are the ones that they keep right next to them when they go to take their nutrition test. And it's almost like a little cheat sheet. It's got like the chunks of info, the most likely asked questions. So could be handy. Do you guys have any questions? Anything that you're worried about? Anything insightful that you want to say?
We're good.
Fair enough. Fair enough. All right, guys. So that's all I got for you today. Let me go ahead and kill the recording, and I'll see everybody tomorrow.